So, Steven Crowder said something moronic, and for some unknown reason, I felt like correcting him. This is following an interview between Anderson Cooper and the family of Robert Godwin Sr., the man who was unfortunately gunned down by Steve Stevens. Crowder is going to make what he thinks is a good argument in favor of Christianity, but I'll let him set the premise himself.
I want to get into something here because the family of the man who was murdered in cold blood actually, I think, surprised Anderson Cooper with their response to a question. And I think this ties into a larger issue. And we see this a lot online, so I want to try and handle this tactfully. I don't want to alienate people. I don't expect you to agree with everything that I'm saying or everything that they're saying. But this divide right now between new atheism and traditional Christianity, I think this is illuminating.
Keep a note here that Crowder is positioning this as being something interesting for this divide between new atheism and Christianity, because that will be coming back up later, albeit very briefly. Now we're going to go ahead and look at this clip. It's not very long at all, just about 50 seconds from the family's interview with Anderson Cooper, but going into this, I do want you to also remember that this interview took place on April 18th, just 2 days after Stevens murdered their father, and hours before Steve Stevens would then go on to shoot himself following a chase with the Pennsylvania State Police.
The thing that I would take away the most from my father is he taught us about God, how to fear God, how to love God, and how to forgive. Yes. And each one of us forgive the killer, the murderer.
You do.
We want to wrap our arms around him.
We absolutely do. We don't. I honestly can say right now that I hold no animosity in my heart against this man, because I know that he's a sick individual. I know that, because of his sickness, whatever evil overtook him that caused him to do this to my dad is not him. It wouldn't be something he would typically do. And I promise you, I could not do that if I did not know God. If I didn't know him as my God and my Savior, I could not forgive that man.
Okay, I'm just going to make the statement now that this is really weird to me. And not in a Christians are weird with their beliefs kind of way. I mean, I couldn't imagine a pastor even showing this level of forgiveness, so to speak. I mean, not even a whole week has passed, and they're already saying that they were able to forgive the man. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing the idea of them forgiving the man in general, or even how they handle their own grief. It just strikes me as very, very, very strange to be able to reel back how overwhelming it must have been for a complete stranger to suddenly and publicly murder your father, especially when you're very close to him, and in just a couple of days. I don't know. I'm not saying that they're bad for being able to get themselves into this frame of mind or anything. It just seems a little unhealthy to me. But like I said, it's up to them to handle their grief how they handle their grief, and this is a terrible situation that none of them, their father especially, should have been forced to go through. This is a thought I couldn't shake, and the more I thought about it, the more unsettling I found it. But of course, I wish them nothing but the best going forward. Now, let's get back to Crowder.
I think this is pretty important to see, because there's this idea, first off, that religions are the cause of all wars, right? You hear that a lot.
Yes, Stephen, some people have said that religion is the root of all wars, and that is an empirically false claim. It is the fact that religion only accounts for maybe about 7% of all wars in human history. This is a small point, but it was worth mentioning, so let's move right on.
Were some people who were leaders in those wars were deeply ideological. Well, of course, you see it with people like Stalin, who was deeply atheistly ideological. It was an ideology. Atheism there was an ism. You may not like to hear it, but his atheism really was borderline religious in his practice, and certainly in his imperialist attempt to expand it.
Okay, no, stop. Stalin was in fact an atheist. But what you're talking about here is not Stalin's atheism, you're talking about Stalin's anti-theism. And in general, anyone who believes in liberalism to any degree, which includes yourself, generally agrees that people should be free to go their own way, so don't try to sit there and posit this as some sort of extreme form of atheism, because it just simply isn't.
The idea here, the moral idea of forgiving your enemies, of showing love to your enemies, that is not something that people hold to be intrinsically moral. That is not something that a society could possibly embrace if it weren't a Christian society.
Crowder, are you 100% sure about that? I severely dislike this Christian-centric line of thought and reasoning because it leads to things like this. What Crowder has said here is so remarkably false that he deserves some kind of medal. But here, I will let him go on and make his position nice and clear, just so that you know I'm not taking this out of context.
Now, you may not think that's a good moral. Muslims don't, LaVeyan Satanists don't, we'll get to that, but that is a distinctly Christian moral premise. Love your enemies. That is not something that human beings do naturally on their own. So yeah, you do need a kind of a flying spaghetti monster in the sky to tell you that, you know what? Your instinct is to hate your enemies. Your instinct is to seek revenge and vengeance.
The idea of forgiving one's enemies is not a distinctly Christian idea. I don't even know how Crowder came to this conclusion. Let me introduce you to an 8th century religion from ancient Japan known as Shinto. Much like in Abrahamic religions, there was a concept of sin. However, sin for Shinto referred not just to the actions of individuals, but also to natural occurrences and unfortunate situations in and of themselves. This is sort of where you get the stereotype of feudal Japanese people blaming next to everything on a demon of some type. Kinda. In a way very similar to the Catholic Church, adherents of Shinto would seek to purify themselves of sin, or tsumi, applied to themselves through a practice of rituals done at shrines. This is known as oharae. This would also manifest itself in the way of life for the ancient Japanese people, particularly in their interactions with other people in a way very similar to the idea of hate the sin, love the sinner. And do you know what the funny part is? Japan had no interaction with Abrahamic religion at all until the Jesuit introduced Catholicism in 1549. But wait, there's more. If we go back, say, 480 years before the foundation of Christianity, you've got the ancient Greek religion and the daughter of Erebus and Nyx, the Greek god of pity, mercy, compassion, and forgiveness, Helios. But wait, there's more. Let's head back to East Asia, and 50 more years while we're at it, to have a look at Taoism. What does Taoism have to say about this? The good person is the teacher of the bad person. The bad person is the resource of the good person. Those who are good, I am good to them. Those who are not good, I am also good to them. Thus, the virtue of goodness. The Tao is the wonder of all things, the treasure of the kind person, the protection of the unkind person. Those who are unkind, how can they be abandoned? Respond to hatred with virtue. But wait, there's more. How could we possibly talk about Taoism without talking about its origin, Confucianism about 20 years prior? What did the great Confucius have to say about forgiveness? To be wronged is nothing unless you continue to remember it. Those who cannot forgive others break the bridge over which they themselves must pass. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Do not to others what thou wouldn't not wish be done to thyself. Forgive injuries, forgive thy enemy. Be reconciled to him, and give him assistance. Invoke God in his behalf. That's right, this is one of Confucius' quotes from 500 BC. But wait. Okay, no, I'm gonna stop right there with that. Listen, Stephen, I understand that you're a Christian, and you're very proud of your faith. But what's your angle here? You have done absolutely no research into the claim that you've just made, but you sit there asserting it as though it's fact. You know better than to do something like this. I know you do. And sadly enough, I also know what the point of this was. So go ahead and get that last part out of your system.
Having a book, a moral guideline say, hey, don't act on exactly what it is you want to do, that cannot occur in a society that does not have some kind of foundational principles, in our case, biblical. And let's contrast that as an equivalency with a religion like Islam. Quran verse 545, life for life, eye for eye, nose for nose, ear for ear, tooth for tooth, and wounds equal for equal. Took the eye for an eye a little bit further down the trail, that one.
Apparently we had the abridged version.
And of course, you did all of this as an excuse to take a jab at Islam. Stephen, do you realize what you've just done? Now, I agree with you that Islam is not like Christianity, and I agree with you that Islam, when followed in its strictest interpretations based on the text of the Quran alone, is not only completely incompatible with Western culture, but also, as Sam Harris would say, is the mother lode of bad ideas. But what you have done here forces me to have to defend Islam and this particular verse of the Quran because just like before when you asserted that forgiving one's enemy is strictly a Christian idea, you've done absolutely no research into the quote you're trying to use as an example of Islam being fundamentally wrong. Now, to a good Christian boy like yourself, this quote should look very familiar because a very similar version is seen in Leviticus 24 verse 20. And if you know anything about the Old Testament, which I'd hope you would, this is not a decree for the adherents of the faith to seek revenge when they're wronged. This is from God telling Moses how to build the legal framework that should be used to govern the Israelites. This is lex talionis, the principle of retributive justice, something that provides the basis for parts of our legal system today, most notably in civil courts, and it is the guiding principle behind the death penalty. So it should come as no surprise that if Crowder had taken the time to look at literally the previous verse, it would have been abundantly clear that these two verses were referring to the Torah itself. Just like in Leviticus, this is not a decree for the actions of the people. This is a guideline of which to establish a legal framework. You are not criticizing Islam when you bring this up. You are criticizing your own Bible. And fortunately for you and your ideology, you are completely failing at it. And again, you've made me, someone who is not in favor or in support of Islam, defend Islam because your criticism of it is so completely invalid. I just want to make it clear right now that I'm not looking at this as an opportunity to attack Crowder just because I have a hate boner for the guy or something like that. I honestly appreciate getting his perspectives on things. I'm a liberal myself, and Crowder does have an ability to challenge my perspectives on the things we disagree with. Hell, that's why I'm subscribed to the man in the first place. But when he does disingenuous things like this, he's not living up to what I expect from him, and he's also not living up to the expectations that I think his audience has of him as well. If he were to receive criticism right now from someone calling him an Islamophobe, regardless of the fact that he's right to criticize Islam, he's right to compare and contrast it with Christianity, and he's right to point out that it can be completely incompatible with Western culture. If he's going to make indefensible arguments like this, what the hell is someone who might consider themselves to be aligned with his political position supposed to do? Listen, Crowder, don't do things like this again. And if you're a fan of his, you need to make sure you call him out if he does. He can do better than this. And I know he can because I've seen him do better before. But for right now, Crowder, you might want to invest in a hijab because your bias is showing, and it's all over your face.